This is Grandma from MakeCode. Today we're going to talk about my new slider extension and we're going to play with velocity and acceleration using the sliders. And we're also going to write from scratch the program that you are now looking at. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to, first of all, we're going to demo the program, and to do that, I'm going to import it from GitHub. I'm actually going to get it from GitHub in the manner that you would. So I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to make sure I'm on the first page. I'm then going to search for MakeCode. Whoops, must have misspelled it. MakeCode. Okay, there you find that one, and that's just one little repository that enables the search to work. So did you see what I did? I clicked on the main MakeCode. Then you want to click repositories. And the first thing we're going to look at this. That's the program. So you clicked on that, then you copy this link and go back to here, and you're going to import a URL. There it comes. Yay, 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 yay. And there it is. While we're on GitHub, I'm going to go ahead and import the extension, because we are going to want to look at it, at least briefly. There is the extension. So I just copy this, go back here, go to Home, and import again, and import a URL, copy the GitHub URL, and there it comes. Okay, so now we have two things to play with. Now, this program that we're going to look at already has the slider extension installed. So if a program is using extensions, when you download the full program to run it, the extensions will already be installed, so you don't have to do that. So first, let's do some demo to understand what this program does. These sliders, this is the Y component of velocity. This is the X component of velocity. The number, which is on what's called a thumb, is velocity, which obviously is 0 right now. This is the little sprite that's going to move based on the two X and Y velocities. These two sliders, which you can select by hitting B, they are acceleration sliders. So this is the X component of acceleration, and this is the Y component of acceleration. Now, one thing that's a decision I made when writing this sliders program is that it seemed unnatural for people who maybe perhaps aren't really expert at using Arcade for the Y component to increase going down. So I changed it so that the Y component increases going up. Okay, so now let's just experiment. So let's go back to velocity sliders, and we will go have a velocity going up. Then it bounces off the wall, and see it immediately reflects, or so it switches between 21 and minus 21, because when it bounces, it uses the same velocity. Let's add a little X component now. That was the Y component, sorry. Okay, a little more. See how it veers off now that it has a Y component? And watch, when it bounces, it reverses both components. Okay, that's cool. Now, if we want to add some acceleration, we can really make things crazy. So let's add a little Y acceleration, and let's make a little negative X acceleration. Now, I will tell you that when I first started programming Arcade, I wanted this program so that I could experiment with velocity and acceleration and their effect on each other in order to develop some intuitive understanding about how they work. Of course, since I have a degree in physics, I did understand that velocity is the change in distance, and it has both the x and the y components. And acceleration is the change in speed, or change in velocity of the x and y components. Now notice, as this is running now, the accelerations are constant because they don't vary unless you change the sliders. So let's just give this one a negative. See how that's going crazy? So you could actually figure out how to direct this sprite any way you wanted to by manipulating the acceleration and velocities. Now, okay, something I wanted to say. What was it I wanted to say? Okay, notice that these are changing and you're not sliding them. Well, what the program does is, because velocity, which are these two things, is changing all the time, it's displaying the current velocity. Now you can still try changing them. See, it is having an effect when you change them. But it's hard to tell because the acceleration is so great. What you want to do if you want to learn is you want to slow down the acceleration. Like now, let's get it back to 0. There. Now we're back to just having the velocity change, reflecting every time it bounces, but basically the velocity is staying constant except for the bounce. Okay, that is the program. Now let's look at the code. We're just going to take a brief look at the code, then we're going to actually code it from scratch. We are very, very brave. Okay. Okay, just to get an overview, the onStart initializes everything. It sets up the sliders, and it sets up the middle sprite, and it shows the labels on each slider so that when it first starts you can see which one is acceleration and which one is velocity and so on. And then the way that it moves, of course, is with these arrow buttons, and so we have to program each of those, and I have a new program. I'll just call it V and A. New V and A. Cool. Now, I like these to be big. Now, now look at that. There's no extension. Where did that go? Oh no, no extension. Well, we want to add an extension. Now, there it is, but I could just click that, but let's go back to GitHub, and this is the slider extension, and there's the URL. So if you had not downloaded it previously, you just type in that URL there and load it. Then it will show here, and it has downloaded the extension. So you see, now we have a slider. Okay, so slider, the main, to create a slider, this is the gadget you use. Looks like I'm going to have to make this smaller. Okay, so the first slider we make is going to be slider for velocity. Now, we want that to be, how do we want that to look? Well, we want to start it at 0. That's the initial value. not 9, 0. We want it to, the minimum to be minus 100, and the positive to be, and the maximum to be plus 100. In addition, we'll specify the width and height. I think 106 will work just fine, and we want it to be horizontal. It could be vertical. Isn't that cool? Okay, we have one slider. Let's look at it. There it is, a slider. Yay! Nothing happens because we don't have them hooked up yet. Okay, so now we're going to go back and we're going to make another slider. Well, I'll just duplicate it. And this one to be slider velocity y. And we want it to also be at 0 and minus 100 to plus 100. And we want it to be width 6. We're going to reverse these. The width will be 6 and the height will be 100. And we want it to be vertical. Now, let's see. Look at those. Great! I like that. Now, as it turns out, on this slider, there's not enough room for 2-digit numbers to display very well. So it happens that we can change the position of our slider. We're going to set the Y slider. We're not going to change the value. We're going to set the left to 3. See, that's moved it out a little bit. Cool. Now we're going to have another slider. This one is going to be acceleration. I guess that I'm using a very verbose approach to this, and I could have used shortcuts, but being the forgetful old grandma I am, I like giving full names. So if I come back 10 years from now, I'm going to look at this, I'll understand it. So the acceleration in the x direction is going to be 0 to minus 100. I'm sorry, it's going to be at 0, minus 100 to 100, width 100, and height of 6. And it's going to be horizontal. So it's kind of like that one. And so let's run that and see what we got. Oh my goodness. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that both the sliders are right there because I didn't reposition them. So what we want to do is set this slider, which is the acceleration in x, we want to set its top to what? Well, through trial and error, I determined that 14 is a good number. Now, there it is with room for the number to display. Cool. Now we only need one more slider. And it's going to be sort of like that one because it's a Y. So we're going to call this one it's a Y component of acceleration. And its value will be 0, its minimum minus 100, maximum 100. By the way, I don't know that minus 100 and 100 are the ranges for acceleration. Because I actually couldn't find the information. So I zotted them. We want it to be 6 wide and 100 height, and we want the orientation to be vertical. Okay, now let's look at it. Yeah, it's right there. It's over that one, so we need to move it. So we want something that looks sort of like that. We're going to set slider acceleration Y. This should have been X. Am I crazy? I got mixed up. This one is vertical. Oh, okay. This one should be X. And it's horizontal. Okay, screwed that up. Now Y is vertical. Okay, now we need to reposition it. And we're going to reposition acceleration Y so that it is, so that the left is at 150. All the way over to the right hand side of the screen. Good. Now, actually this should probably be a little less, but we won't bother with that right now. Now, the next thing we are going to do, actually we missed this business up here, so let's make a couple of little functions here. We're going to make one function that we're going to call make sprites. And that could have a better name. And we'll do that. We'll finish that out in a minute. Right now we'll just leave it as a stub. A stub is something that's not finished, but it lets you go ahead and write your program. So we're going to call make sprites when we first start. And then we're going to have another one called show all labels. And show all labels will be called from right after we get all the sliders built. Then we're going to have a variable called active X and active Y. And each time, let's make a variable active X and active Y. And those will be set to either the acceleration or velocity depending on when you last punched the B button, as you saw earlier, switches between the two. So let's take a crack at that. We're going to set, not change it. We're going to set active X, and it will do that. And we're going to try to set it to velocity, the velocity slider. Now why doesn't I'm renamed that one. How cute. I'm going to fix that. And active Y will be very much the same thing, but it will be the active Y slider. So that will be velocity Y. So that's what we start off with. And then I have a couple of Boolean variables. And I think actually one of these should come, well, let's wait until we actually use them. And then I'll set them here. Okay, let's see what we have now. Now we need to fill in these programs. And we're going to make the sprites. And we're just going to set, this is the little thing that moves around in the middle. So we're going to create a sprite. And I'm just going to leave its name my sprite. And I want it to be itty bitty. So I think I made it 4 by 4. And I put red around the edges and yellow in the middle, just so that it would show up really good. And that's the image I want. And we're going to, for just for the heck of it, since my sprite sliders are named Well, you can just leave. I don't use the kinds at all, so just leave it. We do want to set this sprite so that it will bounce off the wall. I want it to bounce on the wall on. And I want my little sprite to have a z of 2. Why do I want to do that? Because I want it to always be above the slider so that you can see it as it goes across the sliders. And I want it to have a trail so that, and that's again so that we can just see it better. Trail. Okay, there we go. And then the other program that we needed to make is this one, which is show all labels. Show all labels. So what that means is for each of our sliders, we want to display its label. Notice when it just, oh, it's not going to do it unless I have the code written, of course. When the program just starts up, it shows VY, VX, and these are the two AX and AY. So we're going to set slider velocity X, and we need its thumb sprite, so that was the wrong thing. This is what gets its sprite. Thumb text. Now see, that didn't work. Well, let's go back here, that, and we want this to be VX. Oh, actually, that was cute. That's not at all what I wanted. I want to use the sprite say function here so that, so I want this slider X to say VX. Now what is the problem here? The problem here is that this is not a sprite. Hello, it's not a sprite. Hello, it should be giving me an error, but I will fix it so that it will not give me an error someday. And this is what I do. I want it to display at the thumb. Whoops. Put that back. Oh, now, what do I mean the thumb? Well, the thumb is this little gadget. A slider has two parts. The track is what it's running on, and the thumb is the thing that moves around. So the thumb is a sprite, although the slider itself is not. It's like a super. It has a sprite, but it's not a sprite itself. And we want the thumb sprite to say V something. VX. Now let's start it again. Oh, we're not calling it yet. Okay. And we want 4 of these. We want Y to say VY. And we want acceleration X to say AX. And we want y, thumb, to say AY. And then after it says it, we need to wait about 2 seconds, I've learned. And we could explore that once we get the program finished. You can take it out and then put it back and you'll know why we needed to do that. About 2 seconds. See it? There they are, there they are, there they are. Oops, it looks like this one's not working, which is the AX one. AX. Okay, this is weird. Okay, VY is correct. This should be VX. This should be AY, and this should be AX. So let's see. Velocity X, velocity Y, acceleration X, acceleration Y. So therefore, we actually got the sprites in the wrong position. Isn't that fun? So this one should, these two need to be interchanged. Okay, so the two X's, this would be slider velocity X, and this would be slider, now I've got myself mixed up. Oh, that's all I needed to do. Well, that's cool. Now this is velocity X, velocity Y, acceleration X, acceleration Y. Okay, we fixed a bug. That is just so cool. Okay, let's see what else we need to do here. Well, I think we need to tidy up things here a bit. Okay. Now we need a way to select which sprites are active, because remember, in fact, we're going to do that in the very beginning of the program. We need a program called and we need a Boolean variable. So whichever whichever is active no, sorry. Now, just 2 pieces of code, and then I'll show you where this is used. Notice here we selected our active X and our active Y, and that is clearly not correct. We want the 2 velocity sliders to be active. Then we're going to select them like that. Call selected true. Now, what do we have to do up here? We're going to set, go to slider, set active slider. It's a Boolean, it's this one, okay. Set velocity X to true. active selected to true. And selected is a property of a slider, and if it's selected, that will mean that, watch this. Okay, there. See, those two are selected because that's what happens when a slider is selected. Now, eventually, B will switch the two that are selected between acceleration and velocity. But right now, what we need to do is build a B. So we're going to build a B. When B, and we're going to do something called, I'm just going to build it right in B. Okay. If a certain, if a slider velocity x slider velocity x is selected, then that means we want to have another function called set acceleration select acceleration sliders. Done. Okay. And so go back over to here. So that function will now go here. And then guess what? We're going to have one that's to select velocity sliders. And what are we going to do inside these? Well, nothing real complicated. So we need to fill in these functions. So now think about it. We need to turn off these yellows, and we need to turn on these yellows in order to select them. So what we do is we call a routine that we already have called set active false. And we're going to do that same thing in both of these routines, and the reason we can use the same thing in both is that it's doing active. So whichever was active, it turned it off. Then we want to change what slider is active. So we've got that code over here already. So we're going to set active X to slider velocity X and velocity Y because we're selecting the velocity sliders. So the active has to change to velocity if it was not velocity already. Then we need to call the same exact routine but set it true this time. So these new actives are now true. And then we're going to call, we have a little routine called slider labels. When the selection of which sliders are changed, their name flashes and the changed ones, so that can help you remember. And we have to have a text variable. I'm just going to call it the label. And it will be V or A depending on which one you call. So here it's going to be V because velocity is selected, and over here it will be Y. So we're going to move all these things, and we want this to be acceleration X, and this one to be acceleration Y. And then we're going to do this exact same thing and this exact same thing, except it's going to have an A in it. I experimented with combining these things by passing an additional parameter, but it turned out to be messy. Okay, so now we're going to do slider labels. So the slider labels, this is interesting. This is a Boolean, we need a Boolean variable called v doing slider labels. And we want to set that to true. And I think that this is the statement we need over in our on start. And I think it should be false. Yes. Because here you're not doing slider labels, but while it's doing slider labels, there are certain things that you don't want to happen. And I will show you, it's the on-game update. You do not want that to happen while you're messing with the slider labels. So here, slider labels, true. Now we want to change the thumb sprite. So this is up here in our slider again. Whoops. We want to set another say. And we want to do it on the active sprite. So ActiveX thumb sprite equals, we're going to have a little join here. And we're going to join this label, which is either A or V, with X. And we're going to do this with active Y, and we're going to join it with Y. So now we have either VX or AX with Y. Now we need to pause for about 2 seconds. No, 1 second, because now the game is running. So the little ball's bouncing all over the screen when this is done. So you don't want to pause very long because it makes the thing glitch depending on how fast it's going. Now we want to set this back to false because we're finished. Okay. Now let's see if we do anything over here. Well, isn't that interesting? So now we got everything selected. So we have a logic error. Set active selected to false. That should have wiped them out. Okay, it worked when I did it. Let's just try one more time. Computers do the same thing, but yep, this is not a bug in the extension. There's something I'm doing wrong. And I'm not going to find it now because we only have about 15 minutes here. I will find it later. And the main thing we need to do now is, just be sure I did this one right. Oops, this should be false. Maybe that was the problem. Doesn't think it would be, but Nope. Let's see what I did up here in B. Look at that. I don't have B finished. Can you believe it? So I need to call this function. We just accidentally, that's what we need to do. Now, hey, sorry. I still have the problem. Okay, once again, maybe I'll run into what's wrong. Okay, we need to make a bunch of controller keys. We need up, down, and we need left, and right. And what we want to have is a couple of functions called, one is change x, and it needs a number, which is the amount of the change. And we need a change y with the amount of the change. Now you can just call these functions. So if it's going, if x is positive going up and down, it would be -1. And the left is +1. The right is, okay, the left is -1 and the right is +1. But we want those to be y's, sorry. Backwards, up and down is y. And left will be -1. When we change x, left is negative and right is positive. Now, besides these four, you need 4 more. You know what they are, don't you? We need the repeats of each one, because when you want to hold down the slider, you want it to do the same thing. But you want to do it a whole bunch of times. Too bad there's not an option here called press and repeat, then you wouldn't have to have all this code. Okay, there you go. So now we have to put these changes in. This is the code we lack. Okay, we're doing pretty good here. The changes. The first one is really very simple. Change active slider value by something. So the amount is going to be that, and this is going to be the ActiveX. Changes value by the amount. This is going to do the exact same thing, except it's going to be y. And then we have a dilemma, which means we need, this is the dilemma buster. Okay, if it's slider velocity, what we're trying to do here is actually move the sprite. Okay, so you don't know whether it's velocity or acceleration that you want to change on the sprite, because ActiveX doesn't tell you which sprite. doesn't tell you which direction to move the little spritey gadget. So we're going to have an if statement, and it's going to be slider selected. We're just going to do the active x, velocity x, sorry. If velocity x is selected, then we want to change this sprite's velocity by amount. And if it's this, we want to change its acceleration in the x direction by that amount. Now this one is going to be exactly the same, except, so we'll do this, same exact test. Well, no, I mean, for some reason I decided I would use y. Doesn't make any difference because if they're active, they're both active. But if that's selected, then we're going to use here, we're going to change the velocity in the y direction by the amount. And here we're going to change the direction in the x acceleration in the, I'm sorry, this is y. This is, I found a bug in my published program. That's cool. Okay. This should be x, acceleration x, and otherwise change velocity y. Okay. This is velocity x. This is acceleration y. Are you confused? I am, and as it turns out, I didn't have a bug at all. Okay, so if slider acceleration y, slider velocity y is selected, then I'm going to change the velocity by an amount, but it's going to be a negative amount. Oh boy. That one you're going to have to figure out. A negative amount. Same with this. And now let's see over here. This one was positive. Now, why are we doing this over here and why? Well, we're changing the sprite direction, but the way I built these sliders, I want positive y to be going up. So that's why we have to do this. The rest of the, except for this, the rest of the job is actually handled in the slider routine, but this you have to remember. Let's see if anything works over here. Well, it's working, but the slider's not changing. So, there's something we've left out. Oh, yeah! We have to update well, that needs to be amount. That would help. So those are both working. So we seem to have left that, which is interesting. Now, we have one important thing left, and I have 5 minutes. So we're going to try to do the on-game update. This is incredibly important, and I regret not having it done sooner. So we're going to wrap a big if statement around this thing, and we're going to say, if doing slider labels, do not do this. So remember, we set that thing in when we were doing the labels. Okay, so I want every slider now is going to get a label. So we're going to set the slider value, and we'll start with the old X slider. Here we don't use active because we want them all to be updated, because remember, velocity changes even if the acceleration sliders are active. We want this value to be a little bit complicated. We want to round it, otherwise you get great long numbers. And we want it to be my sprite's velocity. Well, that's not too hard. This is not going well. I want this to be X. Okay, now let's just see if that actually does that. Let's see if we can move see how oh well, okay, bug, or maybe just because it's not finished. Okay, we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to jump down to acceleration because it's easy. Oh, this one should have been velocity. That's what was wrong with what I was trying to show you. This one will be acceleration, and this one is going to simply be the acceleration in the X direction. Okay. Now, the other one, the Y's are a little bit harder. I'm going to post the link to the finished program as soon as I get off of here. So we want the Y's to be the same sort of thing, except we want it to be negative. And this is Y, and this is this is acceleration X, this is acceleration X. But this one is velocity X, and this is as velocity X. Okay, that's be correct. Now we want to do the acceleration X, acceleration Y, and this would just be acceleration Y. Now let's see what we got here. Now this is definitely not working, updating correctly. Which is over here. And we are out of time. So I will, just because I'm stubborn, I'm going to find the actual bug in this one, but I'm going to put a link in for you, for a share link to the finished program. Of course, you can find it on my MakeCode GitHub. Thank you.